Okay, guys, good afternoon. I was supposed to be here at 7, but I'm in the office. I'm not feeling too well. So I'm going to record this message and I hope you can watch it. And if you have any questions, please give me a call. Today, we are going to speak about gross domestic product. So gross domestic product, also known as GDP, is a way that economies can be monitored. For example, you see how much the production was in 2010, 2011, so on and so forth. So we can keep track of the production. So that is very important because we need to know how much we are producing. We need to compare how the US produces. Um, uh, so we can make comparisons on how the economies are working. So we are going to analyze some of these aspects of the gross domestic product. So first of all, I think I mentioned that before. Gross domestic product, GDP, is the dollar value of all new domestically produced final goods and services. So I want to emphasize that because GDP, as I mentioned before, is the monetary value of final, and I mentioned that this is important, brand new final goods and services produced within a period of time, let's say 1 year, within 1 year in a particular place, right? In a specific country. So a specific country. Sorry for the writing. So this is very important because we are trying to measure production between countries and see how they are doing. So the definition of GDP, once again, is the monetary value is accounted in the currency of the country under consideration. Of course, in the United States, GDP is measured in dollars, in American dollars. In Mexico, it's going to be accounted with Mexican pesos, so on and so forth. Final goods and services, because we are trying to avoid double counting. Double counting is not good for GDP. Just imagine that we are producing bread. So we need wheat, then that wheat needs to be grown, then picked up, then sent to the mill, then the mill send it to the distributors, and then the distributors sell it to the baker. So just imagine that every time we are accounting for the value of wheat and then flour and now bread. So that's gonna be that's gonna inflate the cost of GDP. So what we are gonna do is we are gonna count the value of the good when it's ready to be sold. For example, I don't care about the wheat, I don't care about the flour, I care about the bread when it's ready to be sold. So that's the reason we only account for final goods and services, according to our book, has to be new and domestically produced. So that is also very important. So we are thinking about the production that occurs in the United States. So that means that if, for example, Toyota builds a car in America, that counts as part of the GDP. But if Ford, for instance, builds a car in France, that doesn't count for the GDP. Even though it's an American company, that GDP, that car belongs to the GDP, the gross domestic product of France. So any good and service produced within the national boundaries is going to be considered part of the GDP, regardless who produces that particular good, either an American company or a foreign company. So that counts as part of the gross domestic product. So also within the year, so for example, if a house was built 10 years ago, and then it's resolved in 2020. So that money doesn't account for or is not part of the GDP of 2020 because was counted 10 years ago when the house was built. So any product that is built in the within a time frame is going to be considered part of the GDP of that particular year. So if I, well, very likely the cost of the house is not going to be recorded, but we can count for the value of the fees that the broker is charging to the person who is buying the house. So so that's the issue. All the goods produced within the year are going to be accounted for. Those who were produced outside of that time frame are not going to be accounted for the GDP. So once again, we have a GDP that accounts for the monetary value. GDP is accounted in monetary units, includes final goods and services. We are avoiding double accounting that are produced within the year. So anything that is produced the year before doesn't count, and in a specific country. So within the boundaries of the country. So also something that we need to know is that things that are traded in the market, in the formal market, they are going to be part of the GDP. Goods and services that are not part of the formal market, they are not going to be part of the GDP. For example, if I am a barber and I have my barber shop, so probably I will be paying taxes, I will be delivering services. But for example, if a friend of mine, he goes and does this haircut somewhere else, so even though he's going to charge money, so that is not accounted in the market. So my activity will be a legal transaction that is considered part of the market. My friends is going to be outside of the market. I don't want to say that it's illegal, but it's not going to be considered as part of the GDP of that particular year. Okay, so we have this nice definition of gross domestic product. Once again, the dollar value of all new domestically produced final goods and services. So so this GDP is reported by the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and by 2016, that was the value of the gross domestic product. So every time I start a class, I always like to show students a very nice web. Well, it's not a very nice US debt clock. So so this US debt clock, you can see the value of the gross domestic product. So far, we are producing $21 trillion. So this is the production is very high. As far as I can tell, this is the largest production in the world. So the United States produces the largest output in America. However, things were not very good in the last years. Well, they were good. So economic growth started in 2008 and ended just in 2020 because of COVID. So the economy grew a lot, but also this growth was based on debt. So countries, the US government from President Bush, followed by President Obama, followed by President Trump, they use debt as one of the tools. So between Mr. Bush and Mr. Obama, there were almost a $20 trillion debt. So the last president added 7 trillion debt, especially for programs related with the COVID. So my point is, we can see the size of the gross domestic product. We also can see the US national debt. For example, as of today, for every dollar that we produce, we owe 30% of this. So for example, if we produce $1 today, we owe $1.30. So that is not a good picture for America. So in 2000, the ratio was almost 60%. So per every dollar we produce in America, we owe 60. It's fine. So by 2020, this is the picture, 130. I was looking at some US debt, some projections for 2024, and that is very scary. So the national debt in 2024, so we are expecting massive expensive from the government. So it seems that we are going to have a debt of almost $48 trillion. So we are going to produce 24. So almost per every dollar we produce, we are going to owe 2 of them. So not a pretty picture. Many people don't believe that this is a problem. I do believe it's a problem because national debt undermines the ability of the economy to produce in the long run. So just imagine that you spend money with your credit card. So at some point, the credit card is going to run out of money, or your expenses, your income is not going to be big enough to pay the national debt. So gross domestic product for 2024 is going to be around $24.5 trillion, but we are going to owe almost $50 trillion. So almost a ratio of 2 by 2. Okay. So I like to show this because that is important for me. Many times we don't pay attention in the economy, and I guess that's very important. That's one of the reasons we should be more knowledgeable about policies, what governments are doing to help citizens to achieve higher standards of living. So that's the role of government, and so that's what the GDP sometimes reflect, or that's what the GDP might reflect, because we can have a GDP that is growing every single time, that produces employment with low inflation. So I think that is a very good policy. So, but so far we are more interested in the definition of the GDP. So once again, I want you to pay attention on the monetary value, final goods and services produced within the boundaries of a country and in certain period of time. So, and those goods, services that are final are going to be traded in what is called the formal market. Okay. So, so GDP can be seen, as I explained last time. I guess very few students were there. So we have GDP from 2 different perspectives. So hold on, let me do this. So we have GDP from two different ways of measure GDP. So we can count the prices and the amount of goods that we are producing, multiply them, and then find out how much we are producing. So that is multiplying the prices, all the prices, by the products, the quantity that they are produced. So we are going to know about this monetary value, right? So we produce 100 tomatoes at $100 or $1. We produce 100 computers at $200. We produce, so we add all these products and then we figure out the value of GDP. So there are some methodologies that allows me to find out how many durable goods are sold, how many houses, residential houses and buildings, and all these goods that are produced within the year. So that might be a good proxy for my GDP. However, we also gonna learn that GDP has 2 different aspects. One is the aggregate supply. And the aggregate demand, right? So the aggregate supply and the aggregate demand identity have different names. When we are measuring the aggregate supply, we are talking about the national income approach. National income approach, right? So we are learning how the factors of production are gonna get paid when the output is realized. So when we produce goods and services and the goods and services are sold, of course, we are gonna pay workers, we are gonna pay salaries, wages, we're gonna pay rents to those who are the owners of the factors of production, land, raw materials. We are gonna pay interest to those who own the capital. Remember, every time one person or a person wants to invest in a business, very likely is gonna use money that has to be so the opportunity cost of using that money should exceed the interest rate, right? So if I am expecting a rate of return of 5%, so I can borrow money at 2%. So I produce my factory, I sell my goods. So at the end, if the rate of return is 5% and the interest rate is 2%, so I'm going to be making a 3%. So those are interests that are collected by those who own the capital to buy goods and services, to buy machine tools and computers, all these things that we need to buy to produce goods. So we need labor, we need land and natural resources, we need capital such as computers, buildings, tools, and we also account for a profit, right? So the person who puts together these factors of production, this labor, land, capital, and entrepreneurship. So the person who puts the money for the entrepreneur that puts the money, so he also needs to be paid. Of course, if I am the owner of a factory, I'm not going to put the factory just for fun. I need money. So that's the whole idea of capitalism. So then the GDP also can be accounted from the expenditure approach. So not only how the money is a portion among the factors of production, we also gonna learn how this is gonna be spent. So, and this is gonna be the expenditure approach. So, and this expenditure approach so includes consumption, investments, government spending, and exports minus imports. Okay, so that's very important. Consumption is the largest expenditure, money that consumers like you and me spend in computers, food, clothes, cars. So that is part of the aggregate demand. So all this money is going to be part of the GDP. And this is almost like 66%, 66% of the gross domestic product. So by far, consumption is a very, very strong predictor of the economy. Also, we have private investments, companies that are buying, are building more factories. They are increasing their inventories, so they need more machines, more tools. So they are going to invest money on that. Governments also have a very active role in the economy. The US government more or less contributes with 20% of the GDP, of the aggregate demand. So it's a very high proportion. Consider that private investments only account for around 15%, right? Something like this, or probably less, because if we round this up, that's going to be more than 100. So let's say for a 10%, right? So these consumption, investment, and government expenditure is basically the main drivers of the economy, but also we have an external sector. We have export minus imports. When exports, well, export minus imports is also called the trade balance. So the trade balance is going to be the difference between exports and imports. When exports are greater than imports, so that means that we are selling more abroad than the merchandises we buy from other country, that is going to be a surplus in my trade balance. When the opposite occurs, when exports are less than imports, so we have a deficit in trade balance. Traditionally speaking, the United States carries a very high trade balance, a deficit in trade balance. So once again, this is surplus. This is going to be called deficit, right? So in the US, we have a very large deficit in trade balance. So that's not fun. The US trade deficit is around $600 to $700 billion. It's kind of a lot of money, but it depends very much on the nature of the imports. So we will talk about that later. So just, I want you to keep in mind, consumption, investment, government expenditure, export minus imports. So that's one way that we can account for the GDP. And once again, this is the expenditure approach, tally expenditures of all GDP goods. So they are it's categorized by type of expenditures. I mentioned consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports, also called trade balance. Trade balance. So the difference between exports and imports is going to be the net exports. So we have an example here. I built a very simplistic Excel file. So I type all these values. So those are the same values as in your textbook. So we have $12 billion in consumption. We have private investment for 3,057 or 3,057 billion. We have government spending for 3,067 billions, and so on and so forth, exports and imports. So here we can, so here I added all these numbers. So I added from, well, all these, and of course I subtracted expenditure, the exports. So this is the size of the GDP. I guess these are real figures that, yes, is the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the BEA, that reported that in 2016 we had a GDP in the amount of 18,625 billions, which basically is $18 trillion, $18.6 trillion. So the trade balance, for example, trade balance, we know that if that number is positive, we have a surplus. If that number is negative, we have a deficit. So in this case, exports minus imports. So we have a trade balance of $521 billion as of 2016. So so that's the way we account for the GDP. So I wanted to do it in Excel. You can build this formula very easy. You just type the numbers. I formatted this with the dollar signs, and I can add the number of zeros I want. So Excel is very easy to manipulate. So you just have to type in all your information and then just write the formula. In this case, I am using here equal, and I can say this plus this plus this plus exports minus, sorry, minus imports, right? So that is something I can do, or I just can use one of the this one, but you don't see it. So this is the sigma. So sigma means summatory. So I click and then go to sigma, and my summation is there, right? So very easy to do. You don't need to be a genius to use Excel. So you can do your computations very easily without using a calculator. And to be honest, if you were in my, if you are asking me for a job, if you were applying for a job and you bring your calculator and somebody else has a computer, of course, I will appreciate more the skills that the person with knowledge on Excel might have. So this is the example. So we have a graph. So also I want to show you guys that, for example, if you type in your address bar, you type the word Fred, so you are going to be directed to the Federal Reserve Economic Data website. So that website is very important. We have data from many years and for so many variables, national and international. So we can find, for example, GDP figures for GDP. So we have the real GDP, the gross domestic product, the real, the nominal. So we have all these values. Okay. So so I just want to show you that this is very easy to obtain. So this is a picture of the GDP. So we can see that the gross domestic product always increases. We had a kind of interesting economic downturn in 2008. As we can see, this GDP always increases. So it might decline today, it might decline tomorrow, but past tomorrow, things are gonna get better. And that has a reason to be. We have what is called the business cycles. I think I'm gonna speak about the business cycles very in another class, but this is a very important feature that, well, not feature, is something that happens in every economy. We have periods of expansion followed by periods of recession. So we have always the economy moving in waves. So the economy grows, then declines, the recession takes place, then we go to the lowest level of recession, we start building synergies, the economy comes out, and we enter in another period of growth, expansion of growth. So that happens every single time in any economy in the world, well, especially in market economies. So the ups and downs of the economy are very common. So, but in the long run, so probably, well, this is a very long time series, but we can see some of these ups and downs of the economy. But as we can see, even though the economy goes up and down, the long-term trend shows that the economy always grows in the long run. So this is a question. I think I made these questions here. So I put the consumption, investments, government spending. The question is how much is the exports? So if you use this formula and say, for example, equal GDP minus consumption minus investment minus government spending and plus exports, right? So we are solving for these values. So that's how we are gonna solve this. You just have to know, or you are interested in knowing the value of your oh, I think I put the value anyways. I was not meant to do that, but that's the idea. So we have this question, draws back to using GDP. Of course, illegal activities are not counted as part of the GDP. Some economies rely very much in illegal money. For example, the flows of illegal goods entering a country is very strong in some cases. So that is not part of the GDP. So those illegal activities are not part of the GDP. In many cases, these like in the United States, most of the activities are made in the market. But in countries, in many Latin American and African countries, activities are taking place in what is called the black market. So they are trading goods and services, and they don't pay taxes. And well, that makes sense. You have you are a barber, of course. You are not going to be able to put your own beauty parlor. You are going to places and cutting hair. People can produce goods at home and sell them on the street. So those kind of activities are not computed. So illegal activities and black market activities are not counted as part of the GDP. In many cases, GDP does not account for inequality across countries. I know for a fact that some oil-rich countries, countries with oil, they have a very high GDP, but many people, a big chunk of the population are very poor. For example, in Mexico, GDP is the 15th in the world, and we have oil. So, but people, what we know as poverty in America has no comparison with poverty in other countries. So in many cases, or in all cases, GDP does not account for inequalities across countries. So domestic production and voluntarism is excluded. So dinner out as part of the GDP, dinner in is not part of the, dinner out is part of the GDP. So for example, you go to a restaurant, you are gonna be using a service or buying products. So dinner at home is not part of the GDP, but what you spend in the food is part of your consumption. So so you don't account for the value of the meal, but you account for the value of the good that you are spending. So environmental amenities or damages, in many cases, like China, for example, China has a very bad environmental situation. So the economy grows so fast and is one of the best economies in the world, but environmental protection is very weak. So, so that is not accounted by GDP. That is not captured by the GDP. Everybody is fascinated about the miracle of China, but basically the environmental damage is very strong. So, and also it's very hard to include this inequality across countries or within the country as part of the GDP. That cannot be seen. So, but nevertheless, is one of the best ways to measure how much we are producing and how much we produce compared to other countries. So two ways that GDP can increase. So expenditures have two components, price and quantities. Of course, prices increase, your GDP is gonna be higher. The amount of goods that you produce is higher, your GDP is gonna be higher, right? So when prices are increasing, and I must mention that when prices increase, so we have the so-called inflation. So, so it's very important that we look at that these two sources of growth, because in one way the economy can grow just because prices are increasing very fast. So, but also, and the best way is that the GDP grows because we are producing more. So that's what we are going to be interested in looking at. So when countries are able to produce more and when this growth in prices is very low. So GDP can be increased by having more stuff, as I said, quantities or more expensive stuff. So that's the price. So tomatoes, for example, today is $2.50. I'm just guessing. Probably next year it's going to be $5. So if you produce 10 tomatoes today, so your GDP is going to be $25. If this is next year, it's going to be $50. So, so you probably are producing the same, but prices are getting higher and higher. So also this is very important because we have a big difference between nominal GDP and real GDP. For example, I am producing goods and services today. I am recording their price and the quantity, and then this is the price today. But so this is the dollar value that is reported using relevant prices in that year. However, we don't care too much about the nominal GDP. I care more about the real GDP. So that GDP that has been deflated or has been adjusted by inflation. For example, I was mentioning this. I produced 10 tomatoes, at, let's say, $1 each, $1 each. So I'm gonna have, let's say tomatoes is the only commodity I produce. This is in 2019. This is 2020. So in 2020, I produced the same 10 tomatoes, but now the prices are gonna be $2, right? So my GDP is gonna be $20. So what is the difference? Of course, if I am accounting for GDP and this is the only product I am producing, so I multiply the amount of goods I produce times the prices, and I get the value of the GDP, right? So in 2020, I'm producing the same 20 tomatoes, but the prices are going up. So what happens is I am, so inflation prices here double, right? So that's what explains why my GDP is bigger. So those are nominal values. Those are nominal values for my production. But I want to find the real value of my GDP for 2020. So what I'm gonna do, so this is the real value, is the dollar value reported using prices that are fixed to a particular base year. So in this case, I am gonna assume that 2019 is gonna be the base year. I'm gonna compute all the production of tomatoes based on the price of 2019. For example, to convert this nominal GDP of 2020 to the real GDP of 2020, I am gonna use the quantity of tomatoes that I produce, and I am gonna multiply them by the prices of the base year. So I'm gonna multiply them by $1, right? So then I'm gonna realize that my GDP was $10. So basically the economy didn't grow. What grew is the inflation. So inflation, we're gonna talk a little bit later. It has many important features. So, so in this case, this is the nominal value of 2019. This is the nominal value of 2020. So I converted this nominal value in the real value by multiplying the quantities of 2020 by the prices of 2019. So just for fun, I'm gonna change, let's say that we produce 20 tomatoes at $2, right? So we are gonna get $40 of GDP, right? So in this case, we're gonna do the same. We're gonna convert these 20 tomatoes, but we are gonna multiply it by the base year. So now my GDP is gonna be 20, right? I hope you understand. I'm just changing the numbers. So I'm assuming that instead of producing the same 10 tomatoes, I am assuming we are producing 20. Here, both quantities and prices have increased. So, so in this case, my GDP is 40, but is that the real GDP? The answer is no, because I need to account for these quantities using the prices of the base year. So to convert the nominal to a real magnitude, I'm gonna multiply the 20 tomatoes by the price of the tomatoes in the base year. So let's say that in 2021, I produce 35 tomatoes or 30 tomatoes, and the price at, let's say, $3 each. So I'm gonna have a GDP of 90, right? but I don't think this is real. So what is going to happen is I'm going to do the real GDP. So let me move this a little bit over here. So just we don't get confused with so many things near. So in this case, this is the nominal value of 2020. Let me put a little bit of color. So this is going to be the nominal value of 2021. So I'm going to use the same color. So I'm going to convert this nominal value of tomatoes into real. So this is the real for 2021. What should I do? Well, I'm going to multiply the 30 tomatoes times the prices at the base year, which is the base year 2019. So these tomatoes are going to be multiplied by $1, and my GDP is going to be equal to 30. So if I compare GDPs between 2020, so let me put another color. Let's say this is a green color, right? So can we compare the values of the nominals? The answer is no. So nominal values are not comparable. What is comparable? What we can compare is the real magnitude. Why? Because the real GDP is given using the same prices. So we can compare 2019, 2020, and 2021 using the real magnitudes. So in this case, we have, so we can see that between 2019 and 2020, the economy grew 2 times, and between, and next year, it grew 50%. So if I compare the original GDP with 2021, I can say, wow, my economy grew 3 times. So those are the kind of comparisons we can do with the real magnitudes, things that we cannot do with the nominal values. So changes in the amount of goods and services. So changes in real GDP can only be due to changes in the amount of goods and services purchased only. So that's what we are looking at here. We are using the prices of the base year, and we are accounting for those particular prices. So once again, we have the real and the nominal. Real is very good for comparisons. We can compare across time and across countries if we have values for real GDP. So nominal is just the value that is happening now. So later on, the GDP has to be deflated or has to be adjusted by inflation. So this is real versus nominal GDP. So this is the nominal always grows. The real has been traditionally higher than the nominal gross domestic product. I think that might be something that I need to go back and check. But this is the trends. We have the real gross domestic product. So we have the nominal. So in the past years, the real is losing some power. So that means that the cost of inflation is very likely undermining the production and the standards of living in America. So that was a brief explanation of GDP. So we also have unemployment. So unemployment is a very important variable. So every time policymakers talk about the economy, they are doing basically they are talking about better economy. Of course, that means producing more. And they also talk about unemployment. So unemployment is a very important issue in the discussion of policymakers. So unemployment is very important. We need to pay attention on that. So unemployment is all civilian, non-institutionalized adults, 16 and over, that are classified. Well, I mean, all people are classified in 3 different categories. So employed, those who are have a job. So if you work at all in the last week, so you are considered employed. So you are unemployed if you didn't work in the last week, but you are still looking for work within the 4 weeks. For example, you lost your job in December 1st. So if you are looking for work between December 1st and December 31st, let's say, you are still considered employed. You are considered unemployed. So if you don't have a job, if you lost your job in December 1st and you are now in January 1st, is 4 weeks later, you are no longer considered unemployed. You are considered not part of the labor force. So that's something that you need to, or we need to discuss. For example, out of the all civilian, we have the labor force and we have the non-labor force, right? So people who are in the labor force are people who are willing and able to work. So those who are not in the labor force, they are neither willing nor able to work. For example, part of the non-labor force or not in the labor force, we can say that people with disabilities, children, sometimes children say, oh, I want to work because I want better life for my family. So that is not possible because they are considered hiring children is illegal. So, so those who are not part of the labor force are people who are neither willing nor able to work. So people who are institutionalized in hospitals or prisons, they cannot work. They are unable to work. So only part of the labor force are people who are willing and able to work. And we have two different components of the labor force: those who are employed and those who are unemployed, right? So if we add the number of employed and the number of unemployed, we are going to have the number of people who are in the labor force. Otherwise, we have the non-labor force. So employed if you work at least in the past week. Unemployed if you didn't work in the last week, but you are actively looking for work in the last 4 weeks, and you are currently available for work. So after the 4 weeks, you are not, even though you don't have unemployment and you are looking for unemployment, you are not considered part of the labor force. So, so that is a very tricky part, because you can be unemployed all your life, and you don't count as part of the labor force. So not the same as the number of people on unemployed insurance. So, so people who are in unemployed insurance, that's different. Here we are going to account for people who are in the labor force, people who are not part of the labor force. Once again, the labor force, we are going to count two different things: those who are employed, those who are unemployed. Okay. So when we are calculating the unemployment rate, so we are going to look at something very interesting. So we are going to see the number of people who are unemployed, and we are going to divide it by the size of the labor force. So here I was mentioning, this is the labor force. So my unemployment rate is going to be equal, unemployment rate is going to be equal to the unemployed divided by the size of the labor force. And remember, the labor force is going to be found by adding employed and unemployed. Okay, so then we're multiplying this by 100 because we are interested in the rate. So so this is a picture of people. So here we have so this is the US population. So I wrote this number here. So we have the US population, all accounted for in millions of dollars, in millions of people. So in 2016, we have 314 million people in America. Those who are part of the population, 254 million people are in the age working are considered age working population. People who have the age are between the age of 16 and 62, so they are eligible for work. But then only out of these 314, this is the people who are in the age working population, but only 153 million people are willing and able to work, and 7.2 million, according to this, are unemployed. So remember, my labor force is going to be employed plus unemployed. So I have 160 million people out of these who are willing and able to work. Among these people, 153 are employed, 7.2 are unemployed. So if I want to find the unemployment rate, so I'm going to do the following. I am going to say equal, I am going to divide the unemployed by the labor force, right? So the labor force in this case now includes the employed and the unemployed. So then I'm going to multiply it by 100, right? So I think, hold on. So this is divided by this, right? So, or sorry, what happened is I asked Excel to put the number in percentage. So what I did is the following. I had a number, but then I asked Excel to do the percentage, and I added some of the decimals. So here we have the unemployment rate. I divided the number of people unemployed by the size of the labor force, right? So we have an unemployment rate in this country, or in this or we had in this in 2016 an unemployment rate of 4.5%. So is that a good number, a bad number? We're going to talk about this because a 5% unemployment rate might be something that the economy can take. So that's something that we're going to talk. So 5% unemployment is still good. So in this case, the unemployment rate is 4.5. This economy is healthy. So so that's what we can say. So so this is how unemployment behaves, so or have behaved in the past 30 years. So we have big unemployment in the 80s. Was a big financial crisis in 82. So unemployment rate went to the roof, then declined. Then we have another mini crisis in 1992. We have a very good time between the end of the Clinton administration. So we have a very strong economy. So unemployment rate goes very, very low. So then we have 2005, the economy is not so great, recovers by 2006, but we have a crisis, the housing problem in 2008. So unemployment rate went also very, very high. So so then we have a very strong period of growth. The economy grows very fast. Unemployment rates are extremely low by the end of 2019. Then COVID hit America, and unemployment rates were on almost 20%. So now unemployment rates are improving. So so that is something that we need to mention. So question, suppose that, so I think I was doing, no, I was not doing that one. So you can find the unemployment rate here. So you can use the size of the labor force. So here is very easy. You have the labor force, and you have the number of individuals employed and the number of people unemployed. So you can find this unemployment rate very, very easy. You can add these two, the individuals who are employed and unemployed, and very likely you are going to get this number. So the number of individuals is 153, and the number of unemployed, what is the unemployment rate? Sorry. So here, That's something I didn't say. Fine. It says the number of population eligible. So this is in this case, this is the size of the population that is eligible for work. But once again, if we add, sorry for the confusion, the employed and the unemployed, we are going to have the size of the labor force, right? So employed plus unemployed. So the unemployment rate, once again, is going to be the number of people unemployed divided by the size of the labor force, right? So that is a little bit misleading, but the key word is eligible. So you might be eligible for you are neither willing, not able to work. Some people might make those decisions. You are very rich and you don't want to work. Well, that's your choice. So so types of unemployment. So we have unemployment in the short run. Let me see. So we have unemployment in the short run, and we have unemployment in the long run, right? In the long run, we have frictional and we have a structural unemployment. In the short run, any is gonna be called cyclical. Cyclical unemployment arises when we are above the unemployment in the long run. So cyclical unemployment, for example, this unemployment in the long run, we can have what is called frictional unemployment. We can have also what is called structural unemployment. Frictional unemployment is something that happens naturally. For example, you are applying for another job or you lost your job, and by the time you find the next job, you are going to be unemployed for some time, right? So you either left the job because you don't want to work for that company anymore, or you were downsized or just fired for any reason. So by the time you find the new job, you are going to spend some time. So that is called frictional unemployment. Frictional unemployment basically is moving between jobs. So you are moving between jobs. So that is going to be called frictional unemployment. And that happens very commonly. So in a regular economy, people are going to be looking for work or it's going to be in between jobs. So normal churn in labor markets, consequence of costly information. Of course, when you lose your job or you want to apply for other jobs and you decide to quit, spending money, time, and resources might be very challenging. So it's not easy to get an interview and then well, submitting resumes and getting an interview and then going through the whole process, it takes time. So very likely we are going to have this frictional unemployment. As we can see, 1 million people lose jobs per week, 1 million people gain jobs per week. So probably you might be very lucky. You lose your job today on let's say on Monday, by Friday, you are going to have a new job. Sometimes it takes more time. Also, we have the so-called structural unemployment. So that happens when your skills are not good for that particular economy. For example, you are learning skills at Lehman. If you were an accountant, for example, you are using an old software. So you graduate and you are, or let's say you graduate from Lehman, you get the job, but 1 year later, 2 years later, 2 years later, a new software comes in and you don't learn it. So probably you are going to be fired because people who know that software is going to take your position. So by the time you lose your job and you rebuild your skills, so that takes even more time. Very likely you are going to go back to the school, you are going to learn these skills somewhere, so it takes time. So in the long run, we have two different types of unemployment. So we can say that the long run unemployment is about 5%, right? So 5% is considered normal in an economy. So anything that exceeds the 5% is going to be considered cyclical unemployment. And this cyclical unemployment is due to the ups and downs of the economy. So when the economy is in recession, cyclical unemployment increases very fast. When the economy is extremely strong, cyclical unemployment is very, very low, and that's the case. Anything that um, has to do with the ups and downs of the economy is known as cyclical unemployment. The unemployment in the long run can be frictional or structural, and naturally speaking, any economy is fine with a 5% unemployment rate. So that leads me to believe that there is a natural rate of unemployment, which is the frictional plus structural plus some seasonal changes. For example, in Christmas, people get usually part-time jobs. So all these things are contemplated in the economy. So this natural rate of unemployment is basically the natural rate in the long run, and is about 5% and includes the frictional and the structural unemployment. Okay, so that's a very important issue to know, because when you are looking at the reports of the government and they say that unemployment rate is 5%, you probably should be happy. When they said that unemployment is 2%, that's good, that's very good. Also, having a very low unemployment rate might be a sign that the economy is producing way too many products. So inflation might be one of the problems associated with that. So when the economy is entering into a recession, very likely we are going to have a very, very high unemployment rate. 2008 unemployment rates were 11%. 2020, because of COVID, unemployment rates reached almost 20%. So that means if we have a 20% inflation and 5% is part of the natural rate of unemployment, very likely the cyclical is going to be the difference between these. So it's going to be 15%. In 2020, the natural rate of unemployment, of course, was 5%, but we have a 20% unemployment. So that means that my cyclical unemployment was 15%, which is extremely high. So so we also have these trends. So we can see unemployment has been declining, which is a very good sign. The economy has always grown over time. So even though it's going up and down, very likely in the past years, we have had in the past 2-3 decades, we have enjoyed some of the most productive times in America. So so we are so the natural so the sorry so this is the natural rate of unemployment. So that is when, well, I was mentioning that is around 5%. So in some cases, this natural rate of unemployment, I apologize, this is the size of the cyclical and the structural, is going down. And what is that? Well, the economic conditions in the past 10, 15 years have been extremely good. So that 5% is lowering a little. But basically what happens is when unemployment goes up and down, they always gravitate around the 5%. So this 5% is very valid. I guess I don't know exactly what that refers to, but so I will be happier with the rate of unemployment, and we can see that it depends on the ups and downs of the economy. So dismiss a little bit this slide. I don't think it's very important because this is the long term. This is the hypothetical rate of unemployment. So, but once again, the ups and downs of the economy generates more or less unemployment. So the effect of business on business cycle on unemployment. So I was mentioning this, and we have how the GDP changes over time. So this is time, right? So I was mentioning the economy moves in cycles. The long run is that the economy is always going to grow, right? So what does that mean? So this is the business cycle. So the economy increases, so the GDP increases over time. So we reach a peak. So this is the peak. So this is the expansion of the economy. The economy increases, businesses are hiring more people. So we enter an expansionary process. Then we reach a peak. And then we enter into a recession. So the economy starts going down, reaches a bottom. So this is called the trough, or many people say that the economy is, there is a downturn. So that is gonna go as low as possible. And then we enter in another path of growth. So that has happened for so many times since the capitalism was created in the Industrial Revolution. So we can see that the economy fluctuates, and we have periods of expansion. We have the peak, and then periods of recession. So we have a drought, and then we have another cycle in the economy. So this is the cycle. So when the economy is booming or is growing, our unemployment is going to be very low. However, when we enter in a recessionary process, unemployment is going to increase. So when the economy is booming, so the real exceeds the potential, firms need more workers. So that is a good time. The economy is booming, is growing. So unemployment is going to be low. When the economy is in a bust, so firms reduce the workforce. So we enter in a process of recession, and firms usually don't need too many workers. So this is the cyclical unemployment, as we can see. So this is the natural rate of unemployment, more or less how, as you can see, I think this is a much better picture. The natural rate of unemployment fluctuates around the 5%. So we can see that in some cases, the natural rate of unemployment here is close to 6, but we have an 11% unemployment. So that means that this is the cyclical, sorry, this is the frictional and the structural unemployment, and this is going to be the cyclical. So the difference between the 6% and the 11% is going to be a 5% cyclical. Okay, so the unemployment rate here is 11. The natural rate of unemployment in this particular year was 6%, and the cyclical, sorry, well, just imagine that this is cyclical, is going to be the difference between these two. So it's going to be a 5%. So the gap between this and this is going to be the cyclical unemployment. So we are going to have a 5% cyclical unemployment. The overall unemployment rates are going to be 11%. And in 2080, the natural rate of unemployment was 6%. Remember, cyclical and structural are here, okay? So, so we have these ideas. So this is the real GDP. We can see that when the GDP increases, unemployment goes below the natural rate of unemployment. When we have decreases in the output, so the unemployment rates are very high. So, so we have this pattern here. We have decreases in the real gross domestic product, and here we have some unemployment, right? So unemployment rate is higher when the growth or the real product declines. So here we have another example. 2008, we have a big loss of output because of the housing crisis. So then we have a strong unemployment rates. So, and this is a question that you have to answer. I think you have a couple of questions. So the last topic I want to talk about is called inflation. So inflation is very important. Inflation is refers to the generalized and sustained increase in prices. So when the price of tomatoes increases, I'm not worried. But when the price of tomatoes and the price of computers and the price of many other goods are increasing compared to those who may remain the same or might lower in price, so that is considered inflation. So when the overall price level increases, and there are many reasons that explain inflation. So here we're not going to define those things yet because we have another class for that. But I can tell you that inflation is considered a generalized and sustained increase in the price, in the overall price level. So, and basically what inflation means is the loss in purchasing power. So you might have $100 today, or if you have $100 from 1 year ago, and then you try to buy goods, like for example, in the past, you bought 100 bottles of water because each one costs $1, right? So you have $100, you buy 500 bottles of water at $1. Today, prices are higher, they are $2, so you can afford only 50 bottles of water. So you have the same $100, but your purchasing power declined because of the cost of the increases in price. So that is inflation. Inflation is not only that the prices are increasing, it also means that the purchasing power of your money declines over time. So inflation measured as an increase in the average price level as determined by the price index. So we are going to be able to build this price index. So this is one of the things that probably you need to do. So price indices track price changes over time by tracking the cost of purchasing the same goods over time. So it's good that we can remove the effect of prices so we can compare the magnitude of the production. So when I was mentioning you this first part, where is it? So this part, so what we are doing, basically, we are removing the effect of prices and we are measuring the goods based on a single price. So that is good because I can make comparisons. So and in order to learn how much inflation has undermined my purchasing power, I need to create this price index. Okay, so this price index, in many cases, well, this is a price index that we're gonna use, compare the cost of buying a fixed bundle of goods using current price relative to the cost of buying the same bundle using the prices that existed in the base year. So as we did here, we are measuring, or we are determining this as the base year. Why did I make that decision? Well, remember, I am a policymaker. I am deciding that 2019 is a good time for using that year as the base year. So policy decisions have to do with many factors, but for sure, governments are going to say, well, this is the base year, and that is going to be the base year. So this base year, so we are going to measure the products, the expenditures in the current year, and then we are going to divide it by the expenditures in the base year. In all of them, we are going to use the quantities of the base year. So here is the example, and it's very simple example. I made this. So let's see. This is the price index. So the price index of the present year, right? So in this case, this is, let's say, 2019 that we determine as the base year. and this is the current year, 2020, right? So I am gonna measure the price of the current year using the quantities of the base year, right? So I'm gonna multiply this by this by this, and this by this, right? So I'm gonna multiply the cost of food and the quantity, the cost of food in 2020 times the quantity of food produced in 2019, right? I'm gonna do the same with the clothing. I'm gonna use the price of the current year and then multiply it by the quantity of the base year, right? So I'm gonna do the same with this third product, which is fuel. $3 times the quantity, $3 in 2020. I'm gonna multiply it by the quantities in 2019. So, and then this is gonna be the price of the expenditures in this year, measured by the quantities in the base year. I'm gonna do also the 2019. So this is the price of the base year, which is this, and I'm gonna multiply it by my quantities in the base year, right? And then that's the last one. So I'm gonna multiply the 5 times the 100, the 8 times 20, and the $2 times 300. So I am gonna create these two different values divided, and then I'm gonna create the price index. So what I did here, I guess it's not here. So, I think I downloaded, but it seems that I did not. Okay, so that's not the one. So let's do it again. So I don't think we will have any problem to do it again. So I'm gonna translate these numbers very fast. View zoom. I'm gonna be 150. So what I did is I said 2019 and then 2020, right? So I said prices and quantities. So let me get the slide. So prices and quantities, and then we have prices and quantities for 2020, right? So I'm gonna have the price of food, clothing, and fuel, right? So this is gonna be the base year, this is gonna be the current year, right? So let me make this here some borders so we can see what we're doing. I made, well, just ignore this. So we have the values. For example, in 2019, the price was $5 for food, $8 for clothing, and $2 for fuel. I'm gonna use the this. So the quantities were 100, 20 for clothing, and 300 for fuel, right? So we bought 300 units of fuel at $2, and we bought 100 units of food for $5 and 20 units of clothes for $8. So in the current year, we are spending $8, we are spending $7 and $3 in the respective products. So let me put a dollar sign. And then the quantities here are 80 for food, 30 for clothing, and 250 for fuel. So what we are gonna do here, so once again, my formula tells me the following. So let me put the formula over here, right? So we are gonna find, So we are gonna find the following. So let me put myself over here. So here I am gonna do the so I'm gonna do this. So this is gonna be the current, so which is 2020, right? So this is the current 2020. So I'm gonna create this, right? So my formula says multiply the prices of the current year. So I'm gonna say equal the prices of the current year times the quantities of the base year, right? So let me say base, and let me say current, so we don't get lost, right? So the price and the current. So I am multiplying the prices of the current times the quantities of the base year. So that's what I did here. So, and as you can see, because this is a dollar sign, my Excel recognizes as a dollar. So in this case, because I am multiplying D3 by C3, all I can do is just drag this down, right? So I have the multiplication of D3 by C3. As you can see here, D4 by C4. So, and here, D5 by C5. So I'm multiplying the prices of the current year times the quantities of the base year. So I can find the value of, I can find the value of how much is this. So, but second, I'm gonna do the base, which is 2019. So in 2019, I'm supposed to multiply the price of the base year times the quantities of the base year. So I'm gonna do equal the price of the base year times the quantities of the base year, right? And then I am gonna drag this down and I get the values, right? So to make the long story short, I'm gonna divide the current by the base. I'm gonna create the price index for the current, which is 2020, right? So what I'm gonna do is here, I'm gonna add these values. So I can either set equal 1 plus this one plus this one. Then because I build the formula here, I just drag this to the right. So I have these values. I'm gonna say equal. My formula is telling me divide the current by the base. So I'm gonna say the current divided by the base, right? So we have 1.46. I'm gonna remove some of the zeros. I'm just gonna leave 2, probably 3. So we have 1.46. So so this is the price index for 220. So basically the price index for the base, which is 2019, is gonna be 1, right? So just believe me now, I don't want to do the math here, but always the base year is gonna be 1 or 100%. So this is the current. So this is the price index for 2020. This is the price index to 2019, considering that the 2019 production was the base year. So we found these values, which are very helpful. So we have the quantity, so the expenditure of 2019, the expenditure of 2020, we are dividing the expenditure of the current year divided by the base year. And we were able to find the price index for the current year. So then we can track inflation. So in this case, this is not inflation. This is the price index for 2020. This is the price index for 2019. So to find the inflation rate, what we are going to do is the following. So inflation rates are, so let me read this. The change in a price index from year to year is used to measure inflation. If the change is positive, we have inflation. If the number that we obtain in this value is positive, we have inflation. But if it's negative, then we have deflation. So, so that is the rule. So this is the formula for my inflation. I am gonna subtract the price index from the base year from the price index of the current year. Then I'm gonna divide it by the price index in the base year and then multiply it by 100, okay? I'm gonna repeat that. This is the current year minus the base year divided by the base year. So that is gonna give me the rate of inflation. So I'm gonna do the following. So my formula tells me, once again, that I need, so I'm gonna open a parenthesis, I need the price index of the current year minus the price index of the base year. Then I'm gonna divide this by the base year, and I am gonna multiply it by 100. So then I'm gonna have the inflation rate, right? So the inflation rate between 2019 and 2020 was 46%. So so this is a 46% inflation. Of course, that is extremely high, and this is just an example to show how this is done, right? So we computed the price index of 2020, we computed the price index of 2019, and then we found the inflation rate. So common prices indices. So we basically have this so-called, so this is basically known as the consumer price index. That's the most important and most used price index. So the consumer price index is most widely reported and tracks prices of products consumed by the typical consumer. As I mentioned, consumption is very important, and then we can so we can measure inflation among consumers, and this is called the consumer price index. So is known as the CPI. So every time the government reports inflation in terms of the CPI. Also, we have the GDP deflator. You can go online and find how the GDP deflator is measured, basically the same idea as the one. So besides the consumer price index and the GDP deflator, we have some other measurements. For example, if you are a producer, you very likely will be very interested in the producer price index, how much prices of inputs like labor or raw materials are increasing. So you can look at those reports. So this is inflation. Inflation is between 1% and 2%. So a healthy economy has an inflation rate between 1% and 2%. So as we can see, some periods of very high inflation, 79, 78, we had a huge inflation in the country, but that was the last year we had inflation. Most of the times inflation has been very low. So once again, a good inflation is between 1% and 2%. More than 2% might be not acceptable. Less than 1% might not be acceptable either. So between 1% and 2%, we're keeping the economy healthy. So, and those questions that you have to answer. So if you have questions, please send me your questions via email. I apologize, I wasn't able to make it today, but I am gonna send this this recording as soon as possible. Okay, goodbye.